Hi everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of the Human Factor Security Podcast, where I am privileged to be joined by a very distinguished guest. Welcome to the show, Gabe Gumbs.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Gabe is the Chief Innovation Officer at Spirion, but can you tell us a little bit more, Gabe, about really what that means and what it is that you do?
Yep. So I am the head of our innovation department and product strategy. So my responsibilities largely focus around understanding the problems within our space and defining how we're going to solve those. So it's a combination of product strategy, product management, product marketing, you name it, all of those things where we as a data security organization are always endeavoring to find new ways to make our customers' lives easier. So I spend a lot of my time in the trenches with customers, kind of understanding their problems, and then we have also some research folks that help us figure out the best way to approach these things, and then we turn those ideas into products.
So this is interesting to me because you use that phrase "in the trenches," and I know that's something you really value. You know, when I was doing research on you for the show and everything, you talk about having that real experience, that real kind of incident experience. And do you want to talk me through, like, how did you get into the industry and what were the first kind of jobs that you did?
Yeah, so that in the trenches is for me extremely important. A lot of times you'll hear me refer to it as, spending a lot of time in problem space. And so I spent the better part of my career. I've been in information security now for going on 20 years. I want to say it's about 19 at this point. I lose track now. And so I spent the better part of that time as a practitioner, as someone working for large Fortune companies trying to solve those problems. I spent a lot of time consulting to those organizations, building programs to solve those different security challenges. And the early part of my career really began with just a curiosity and the passion for security. So I was very active in the alt 2600 hacking scene when I was younger. I was also a member of my local Linux user group, the old NY Lug group. They're still around. And so I developed a passion and a curiosity for these things early on, and have spent the better part of my time actually exploring those problems.
Did you study security at college or anything?
I did not. No. I spent that time as a mechanical engineer, which coincidentally there's a lot of programming involved, but not quite the same. So date myself a little bit. There weren't really any security college courses.
No.
No. My security college courses were running around with just a bunch of well, quite frankly, hackers in the New York and Boston scene.
That's excellent, though. I mean, because I think sometimes we have guests on the show. In fact, nearly all the guests we have on the show say the same thing, that, it's only recently that there are courses in this stuff. It was all hands-on learning then. Can you remember sort of when you first realized that security was going to be a career? Because there mustn't have been a clear career path then.
So I went into networking and IT support kind of early on, but I was still working on a bunch of security related projects, if you would, on the side outside of my quote day job, if you would. And it was right around that time when security did start becoming quite a bit more present in the workplace. There were some pretty high profile security incidents, back then. They were largely worm and virus related, et cetera. And it was at that time that more formal studies of security did come around. And so I did actually at that point start spending some more time in, I guess you'd call it kind of a classroom setting for security. So, the SANS Institute had a number of classes that you could take around those things a bit more formally back then. So it was around that kind of inflection point where I started taking what I had been doing a bit hands-on and kind of not translating, but studying some more of the practical applications of it in industry.
And did you have a mentor? Did anyone sort of show you the way?
I did have a mentor. That's a question I don't get asked often. And yeah, there's one person in particular who kind of took me under my wing and taught me a lot of what I knew about the industry and about business in general as well too, but very much related to this field. That gentleman's name is Richard Shoemaker. He unfortunately is no longer with us, but he was a hell of a guy and a hell of a mentor. Probably one of the smartest folks I'd met in the business.
So where was the first position that you had? Where was the first proper security job, and what did you do?
The first proper security job was actually for it was for a consultant company that had a number of contracts with law firms throughout New York City. And some of my first engagements were in the forensic area, which I've got some stories I could tell there. So one of those firms specialized in high profile divorce cases, which
Wow.
was, yeah, quite interesting. So I'd I'd find myself nights and weekends sometimes inside of people's homes trying to retrieve data from their hard drives for use in some very, very unfortunately messy divorce cases. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, and then
Okay.
having to testify, with regards to what we found and kind of explain how we got to it. Make sure there were proper chains of custody involved, etc. A lot of it was just trying to uncover. Being completely transparent because it's long enough that no one should be able to connect any dots.
Okay.
Um, but being able to uncover a lot of hidden assets. It was a combination of either that or evidence to kind of bolster their divorce cases. It was messy stuff. I'd love to tell you it was happy times, but it certainly it was interesting. And there's a whole lot of very interesting stories I could tell under different circumstances.
Yeah, because I mean, you would have only been still very young then. I mean, were these
Was
well-known people? And
some of them were. Again, I'm not going to repeat any
no,
names.
I don't expect you to, but I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
imagine that
you
would have
can
been
imagine.
fairly intimidating. And
A little bit, yeah. And you're right. I was fairly young. I think being young was probably an advantage too, though, right? You kind of have this almost aura of invincibility about you, like sure, whatever. And the I think the most impactful thing being that young was, kind of getting intimately involved in the affairs of people that weren't that young, quite frankly. And were there some famous people? There were some names that you might recognize, at least two or three of them. But then there were also a lot of names you would not recognize, but that were they had pretty high profile jobs
yeah.
in banking and finance and in Wall Street. Again, this being New York City, I'm sure some people might recognize those names, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't need the names, but I mean, I could.
good.
So, because I know, right? But it
What
just
names? There are no names.
there are no names. But so were you? So let me just get this right, because this is great. So you're sort of passionate about sort of tech and you've got you're learning, kind of still learning at this point. And what happened? I mean, without details that was identifying anything, but just generally, were you asked to go on those computers and like pull sort of incriminating documents and
Yeah.
prove things like infidelity or fraud? Is that the type of thing?
Incriminating documents, break into the machines. A lot of them would have been locked and password protected, and or the files themselves were, and so we'd have to do those things. Now again, we would have permission from.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So for legally, and I'll be darned, I don't know how much things have changed or updated. You also have to remember security laws were a little nascent back then,
Right.
largely non-existent. And so we would have permission from one of the spouses. So they were the legal owners of the properties, etc. But
Of
yeah,
course. But
yeah.
still, I mean, unprecedented times and practices, really.
Indeed, yeah, and so yeah, no, we'd be asked to go in and find information. In one case in particular, one lady was both sure her husband was having an affair, as
Hmm.
well as she was equally convinced that there was large sums of money that he'd had stashed away elsewhere that she believed she was entitled to as his wife, which I'm sure she was. And so I say we, it was myself, and sometimes I'd have one other partner with me. Um, in this case in particular, we set an appointment late in the evening on I think like a Friday to go retrieve some information from this person. Ooh, was it a Friday? Now that I'm recalling this story, oh man, it's wild. I remember a number of things about it because it
Hmm.
was when that evening driving back home there was that big blackout in the northeast of the
Oh.
U.S. So I'm sure we can pinpoint the exact date because that's well known. And I got stuck on the Queens Borough Expressway in the middle of this blackout with very gasoline left in the car after having spent hours at this person's home trying to retrieve all of this information, of which we found exactly what we were looking for and
Right.
exactly what we thought to be the case. I'd say 99.9% of the times it's exactly what everyone thinks it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do you know, it almost reminds me a bit of social engineering, some of this stuff. It's like that you were looking for the human. Sorry, I have to bring it into the show always, but it's just like you're looking for that human thing, the sort of the one bit of information that kind of brings everything to fall down or to prove the case or whatever.
You know, the human factor was important because a lot of times, instead of just trying to brute force my way into things, unfortunately, much like today, people sometimes aren't just terribly creative with how they hide their secrets and or their passwords. And so, you know, just a few minutes getting to know this individual, you know, you could start kind of enumerating what you think their passwords may be. And sometimes I'd say maybe a third of the times I wouldn't actually actively have to do a whole lot in the way of breaking things. I just have to spend some time getting to know this individual, and the rest would kind of start to unfold itself. And then I get into more to more actual technical work of you know, making digital images of the machines and taking them off site. Yeah, you know, looking for things that have been deleted on the machines and trying to recover, you know, the deleted information and things like that. But there's very much a human element to it in understanding how these individuals think or you know, how they would have gone about their activities.
And you know, now, I mean, these days you're a huge advocate for, you know, data privacy and things like the right to be forgotten. I mean, I suppose at the time nobody could have really envisaged how important that was going to be sort of 20, 30 years later or whatever it is. That you know, can you talk a little bit about the fact that there's so much data on all of us around now. Now, a big part of what you do is kind of guarding that and looking into that whole area.
Yeah, now my responsibilities are around protecting data subjects,
Yeah, right.
as opposed to helping to expose them. And you're right. I mean, I certainly don't know of many people that were thinking about you know, the implications of our data being used and or collected the way it is. I mean, data on us was always being collected, but there was also a big difference too. There was no social media like this at the time. In fact, I'm thinking about the timing. Yeah, no, Facebook didn't exist yet.
No.
There was no such thing along those lines. Maybe there was MySpace. I don't recall. I've never been a member of any of those platforms because from the very first time I glanced at those platforms, my first thought was, yeah, no thanks. That seems like a bad idea. I appreciate it, but no, I'm good. So yeah, no, none of us thought about it that way. But fast forward to today, and I spent a lot of time not just thinking about data security, but data privacy. And you can't have data privacy without data security, right? There is no way to keep information private without equally keeping it secure. Although you can keep it secure without keeping it private. And you know, if you think about the laws that were on the books then, the closest we had to a data privacy law would have been HIPAA, which was signed into law around 95 by the Clinton administration. And although, you know, the P in HIPAA stands for portability, a large part of what we did end up with as a byproduct of HIPAA was a lot of privacy. It did ensure that there were rights granted to data subjects as far as their health information goes, to be able to protect the privacy of it. But there was certainly no one was thinking about GDPR and CCPA back then. That wasn't even a dream in anyone's brain.
No. And so after that, sort of those days of that first kind of role that you had, you know, you're with Spirion now. What happened in between? What sort of jobs did you do in between? What sort, you know, how did you see your career evolve to being now where you are now at Spirion?
It took a lot of turns, all within the security industry, but I went on from there to start up a small security consultancy with some friends also, and we did a lot of different types of security. We did endpoint security, network security, you name it, pretty much ran the gamut of things. I moved on from there to a bit more corporate roles where I worked for some financial organizations and a large pharmaceutical organization where I built out some of their their security program. So a massive global intrusion prevention program, transitioned into a bunch of their application security work. From there, I got a call for some friends that were building an application security platform, and I went there to do some work for them. So, overall, my entire career, I've covered a lot. I think cryptography is probably the only place I've never spent any real time in, but most of the other domains of security, I've either spent a lot of time getting deeply intimate with and or at least familiar enough to be rather dangerous. So it's meandered throughout those different domains. I've never just kind of been, like, I'm an AppSec guy and that's all I've done for 20 years kind of thing. And what I ended up doing was translating all of that knowledge, in that deep knowledge of the security space and all of the different nooks and crannies of it, as well as what I learned throughout my corporate career in being able to translate business requirements into actual technical needs. And that kind of naturally led to what I have right now, which is the responsibility for taking those business requirements, understanding the problems, spending time in problem space, translating that into business needs that we can then adapt technology to go solve the problems for. So if you take a step back, you can kind of see the path and it makes sense, but up close it looks a little bit more like a windy road.
But it must have been, I mean, that's a lot of experience to pack in, in an industry that moves so quickly. But, did you, with that pace accelerating, is there any sort of incidents that stand out, or any sort of key moments over that career that you kind of see as turning points for you or for the industry generally?
Oh, it's a good question. There were so many, and so many of them make the news. But when you obsess about the industry the way I do, there's so many incidents that never make the news that are significant, at least to us, if you would, security geeks. But I think I think the hacking of the NSA probably stands out as one of the biggest ones. I mean, I don't just talk about the Snowden incident in particular, though I think that is probably one of the other significant ones. When some of the NSA hacking tools have been released into the public, it equally kind of dovetailed with the Edward Snowden scenario, where we started understanding how a lot of this widespread data capturing was happening, but kind of bringing it right to the forefront of I think many of us know how easy it is to breach any number of systems. Yes, some are easier than others, but ultimately, with enough time and resources, there are a few systems that can't be breached, which is why we talk so much about risk reduction and not really elimination, because it's not really a thing. But I think the release of the NSA tools is probably one of those moments for me that was just very monumental in the industry.
Now, the point being is that the industry has grown so quickly and so exponentially over the last few years. And there was this, I know one of the topics that you're really passionate about talking about is the idea that there isn't enough of us on the professional side to face the challenges, this sort of skills gap. And the thing that I wanted to ask you about was, I know you've spoken before about this security skills shortage, but now you're saying that people are saying that there's going to be one in data privacy, that this is now the new area where we're going to be sort of scrambling for recruits. I mean, I know this is an area you're really passionate about, so let us know what you think.
Yeah. If by passionate you mean I have almost a religious fervor for my disagreement with that general statement, yes, I am passionate. So let me break that down into two parts. I'll take the security side of it first, and since this is the human factor, let me first answer by posing a question. If humans remain one of, if not arguably, the weakest link in security, because I still think they are. I don't know many people would argue with that, whether it's social engineering them or phishing them or whatever the case is. Then what is the likelihood that we could have enough counter human beings to help off balance or to balance out the number of humans that are involved in every digital activity there is, right? Like that straw man argument almost means that you would have to have one skilled security human being for every non-skilled person there is that touches a computer. if I pose that straw man argument, you would absolutely burn it down in about 2 seconds. The challenge I have with the quote security skills gap is I think we have a couple of problems. One of them is a cultural problem where for too many years, and it's still persists and lingers a little bit right now, is in the security industry. A lot of folks would like to otherwise have everyone think it's this big esoteric domain that only a handful of very intelligent people might be able to get their heads and hands around. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. It also means that from a STEM perspective, we keep a lot of talented folks kind of at the gates, if you would. So there's a lot of gatekeeping in security. So that's my first issue. The second issue I have is from a technology perspective, and this is the innovation officer side of me. I think the problem we have is we don't design a lot of solutions well enough for us to have different types of people enter into the industry so that everyone doesn't have to be a security expert to understand how to otherwise secure data, because it's part of everyone's responsibility. Everyone that interacts with it, whether you create data, curate data, you're a data steward, whatever the case is, it's all of our responsibilities. And the solutions that we have in front of us to meet that problem they're not usually well crafted to help make that job, if you would, easier, that task easier. No. We most certainly are going to see what also looks like the same problem in the privacy side of the world. But I think part of that problem is equally going to be the same. In the last 3 to 5 years, we've gone from a few dozen privacy technology organizations, that privacy technology stack, if you would, to, as I sit here before you right now, well over 300 of them, just in that short period of time. And in the time it took me to finish that sentence, I'm sure 2 new ones sprung up. In fact, I was doing some other research the other day, and I found a couple of new privacy technology companies doing some very interesting things. They were all started literally within the last 90 days. Wow. Right? So will we have a shortage gap? Sure. We will have a shortage of individuals that understand all of the domains of privacy and are able to meet the oncoming privacy operations challenges, especially with a rapidly evolving technology field of 300 plus organizations with dozens of different technologies. Yes, we're going to encounter the same problem, and it's not a human problem. It's a technology problem, and it's very much a gatekeeping problem. So.
But is it not a human problem as well, in as much as I think one thing that the COVID crisis has sort of brought home to me is the fact that you're not going to be able to cope as well without clicking into this technology, and the technology is flawed and can be exploited. So I wonder whether there is something in saying that it's not entirely technological.
Well, I did blame
that's a gentle pushback.
I was going to say I did put some people in the mix there. I blame people for gatekeeping.
You did.
But when I say it's not a people problem, it's not a people shortage problem.
No,
it's how other people allow those not in the know, if you would, to approach it, and it's how yet another group of people build technology to help solve that problem. So it's the shortage problem that I push back on, not whether or not it's ultimately a people problem. It's the shortage.
Yeah, because I can't see that someone with your kind of career and your kind of passions, or there's that word again, is ever going to kind of really design things that kind of that keep those walls built up. It's all about, I guess, ease of use in some ways, and making those products that solve the problems as user friendly as you can.
I certainly am always I try to be cognizant of it, right? I shouldn't say always, but I certainly try to check my bias there at every chance I can. Because it is easy to get mired in your own thinking there, and it's really easy when you understand a problem, or you think you do, to kind of let confirmation bias take over, and before you know it, you've built a system that is really good for you to use, but no one else, right? The concept of privacy user experience is one that some of the analysts are defining, and whether you agree with that word and terminology or not, generally what they're trying to define is how easy do we make it for the average individual to be able to control their own data privacy?
Mm.
How easy do we make it for you to request a subject report on yourself, respond to it, and then ask for that information to be handled differently? That entire concept of having a privacy user experience for the average person is that's part of the challenge that I'm really driving home is if we don't make that easy, and that is very much a technology problem, right? Because
Right.
you shouldn't have to know how to operate a high-tech system to be able to request that Amazon remove your data. You should be
No.
able to make that request very simply, very easily, and it just happens. So if that experience, because it's technology you're interacting with there, is not one that is both pleasant and easy, then we do create these artificial gates and roadblocks to making data privacy and data security accessible to those that don't wake up every day thinking about this problem.
Yeah.
That's where I think the problem is, not whether or not there's a shortage of human beings that can actually address the problem.
No, because I think now, I mean, that the amount of people wanting to get into the industry, I've heard it said that a lot of the time with that skills shortage was about the way that the job descriptions were written or over specification.
Yeah, that goes back to the gatekeeping I was speaking about. Asking someone, and I posted something maybe a few weeks or months ago, I don't remember, that I actually came across in a posting on LinkedIn for an entry-level position that required something to the tune of 6 or 7 years of experience with a specific technology that only existed for 4 years. Right now, maybe that's a typo. Sure, maybe that's a typo, but you can't expect to have these very high bars of technology, and especially as technology changes, that quickly. I don't expect someone to have 10 years of Golang experience. It hasn't been around that long, so that's not going to be a thing. But yet, folks, there is. That's equally what happens when you have when the hiring process gets abstracted from the actual individuals that are doing the work. And no offense to the hiring managers in the HR world, but I think if they better understood how to filter for capacity and the word I'm looking for is aptitude versus just this person has X number of hours doing this task.
Yeah.
And I think we could equally break down some of those walls. Again, there's a lot of gatekeeping, a whole lot of gatekeeping.
Because you've said before, a lot of the time it's about, you learn all the time. You're constantly trying to learn. It's like a lot of it, I would say, if you get someone with the right work ethic, who's capable of being taught and is open to ideas, then you can teach them all the sort of technical things they need to know, as long as they're capable of learning that. It's more character, surely, still, it's character and ethics and
aptitude. Absolutely. I spend a significant amount of my time learning new technologies as well. I'd be remiss in my duties as an innovation officer if I just sat back and relied on all of the old tech that I knew and think that I was going to be able to radically solve problems differently.
So what sort of advice would you give to people coming into the industry? And I always used to ask this question, but now I'm asking it in the light of 2020 and the dumpster fire that this year's been. It really is a very pertinent. What would you say to young people who see this industry as a potential career? What advice?
I think the first thing I'd ask them is make sure that it is actually what you want to do. This is my own bias here, but having a passion for it certainly makes it a lot easier, big air quotes, right? But when it's a thing that you genuinely enjoy and love every day, even the bad days are pretty decent, right? So I'd say ask yourself that question first and foremost. Is this the thing that you really, really, really want to get out of bed to do every day? And if the answer is still yes, then I'd go back to that learning. Then you've got to immerse yourself in understanding it. You have to have a curiosity and a passion for learning. Those two things are mandatory. You have to be curious about all the things all the time within that domain, at least, right? Always ask that next question. Spend more time in problem space than in solution space. You need to really understand the problem before you can ever draft the first solution to it. And on a more practical level, in terms of what advice I would give, I still think the basics are necessary, like just understanding some of the basics of technology, how it interacts with each other. Maybe understand all of the layers of the OSI model, but certainly equally spend some time getting familiar with one or two scripting languages, at least one coding language. Those are definitely great places to start, especially as someone in security.
So to finish then, this has been great speaking to you, Gabe, and it's good advice for people, because I think people must see the way the world is at the moment and the threats. And I suppose the cyber threat kind of took a bit of a backward step in a lot of people's mind this year. But, if we were to project forward, what do you think your job is going to look like in a couple of years' time?
Here's what I know from the last 20 years of my job. Whatever answer I give you, I'm probably going to watch this tape.
There'll be breaches.
Breaches will continue. Here's what I will say. For sure, at least that I would be willing to put money on, is that intersection of security and privacy is only going to become further intertwined. It was always there, but it's now really in the forefront. I think the operationalizing privacy is going to be, I don't ever see that not being part of my security focus moving forward. That there's going to be some significant part of my career that is going to be inextricably tied with the operational aspects of data privacy, just as much as it has been data security over the last 2 decades.
So I'm sure everyone's going to want to find out more about you and about the company. I mean, you speak at conferences and things. Where can we follow you and find out more about what you do at Spirion and whether you're speaking or
Well, we'll see if they actually want to find out more. But if they're still listening, so I'm on Twitter. It is the one form of social media I am on. So at Gabriel Gumbs.
So you obviously want to go for the least stressful form of social media.
Absolutely. And then the second most least stressful one, or the first maybe, is LinkedIn. So you can equally find me on LinkedIn. You can find Spirion and learn more about what we do and how we help protect folks' data and their data privacy at Spirion.com. We're also on Twitter at Spirion. And last shameless plug, we actually with one of my colleagues, we've got a podcast we do ourselves on data privacy. It's called Privacy Please Podcast.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we are.
We'll put the links. We'll put the links. Go across the top. Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Where we talk all things data privacy.
Oh, well, listen, Gabe, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. So thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thank you for having me. We certainly need people like you as well, too. So keep up the good work and stay safe.
Oh, thank you, Gabe. Well, you take care. Bye-bye now.